Yeah, so you were the one who translated that. Okay, yeah,
Yes.
awesome. Yeah.
He did it word by word. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
No, I made a script to work with Google Translate.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. There you go.
Okay, so this next hour, we're going to be talking about the best programming approaches and when to use them. Let me start off this with the poll, which I wrote again really quickly. Here we go. So I'm curious for people here. Is he a fan? All right, he's the author of the Raphidium.
Yeah, there we go.
So yeah, when it comes to just writing stuff in auto hockey in general, which one do you do mostly? Are you acting like a human, sending mouse clicks and keystrokes and whatnot? Are you taking more of an API approach or programmatic approach? Or are you doing a bit of both depending on what it is that you're working with? Meanwhile, so this is where I think it's going to be a great conversation with some, especially Maestriath has been working with me for years doing stuff, and with the Zayas too, and Tank also. We've all done a lot of crazy stuff, and I know Geek Dude as well has worked in a lot of different ways. So, how do you approach a given topic? What are the things you take into account? Like, first off, if you're writing a script for someone, what's your first thing you jump to? Because there's a lot of different dimensions we got to take into account, right? Like, one is just who's going to support the script.
Yeah.
I mean, on an ongoing basis. But what are other things you guys think about? Anyone want to chime in here?
I guess it's also important if you want to have a user using the PC when the script is running.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Is a human going to be using the code? Right. Because if you're imitating humans, if you're taking that approach, it can be very, problematic. You got to understand that. Another big one for me is just understanding how many computers it's going to be run on, right?
Joe, can you unmute?
Yeah, Maestriath and
Maestriath, yes.
whoever.
I've tried. I mean, I've sent before. I guess maybe once you mute yourself.
Oh,
I
yeah,
had muted
is like that.
myself, and it
Yeah,
won't
when
allow
you
me
mute
to unmute
yourself.
myself.
Yeah, that's right. It does that. It's true.
Personally, it all has to do with how many are going to be using the code. Is it going to be used on one machine? Is it going to be used on multiple machines? If it's multiple machines and everything else, then you pretty much have to try to use any API, if at all possible, because APIs are usually, network aware and multiple people can use them all at the same time. I really don't, I try to just use like keystrokes and mouse clicks and everything else as little as possible, just because it's so unreliable. Any kind of API or directly interfacing with a database online is always going to be preferred.
Okay. Yeah. Let me.
We got quite a distribution as far as the answers in the poll.
Actually, it is very surprising. I was not surprised. I was not expecting that. Tank, you were trying to say something, right?
Yeah. So, I guess most of my experience has been more in a corporate environment with this particular question. And I apologize. I am up and being mobile right now because I had a delivery at the door. Can everybody hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right now, what I would say is, like, in general, for me, I am very similar to Chad in that sense of whenever I can avoid using clicks, moving the mouse or the keyboard, I would definitely avoid that whenever possible. That's kind of like my last resort.
Now, what's the reason why? Is like Dimitri brought up a really good point of it. Hey, if the person, it prevents a human from using the computer at the same time, right? That's one reason why, but there's a couple other reasons why you would make that preference, Isaias.
Well,
Right.
yeah, of course. There's a few situations in which sending keystrokes, basically you have to be aware where you're sending those keystrokes, because if for some reason the window where you were sending it to changed, now you're sending keystrokes to something totally unrelated to what you want to automate and stuff like that. So that means that your code has to keep track of many other variables other than just knowing that you are sending to the correct location. So I just don't like to use it just to remove the variables of what happens if the window goes into the background? What happens if a pop-up that I was not expecting, the antivirus pop-up gets in front of the window? What happens then? What happens if, the user moved the mouse? Those kind of things. I try to remove those variables from my automation as much as I can. I'm sorry, Tank.
Sorry about that.
It seems to be
Yeah,
that you're back.
somehow
So
I
you
got
can
muted again.
just- okay.
Anyway, so as I was saying, my situation has mostly been in a corporate environment. So, I think all of us who've been doing this for a while are on the same page about let's avoid mouse and keystrokes, because fundamentally it just doesn't work. I do look for a COM interface or UIA or something that will interact directly with a window if I have to use a user interface for the automation. But I think it often gets overlooked that people will ask for automations and not really understand what it is they can get, let alone what they should get. So there kind of needs to be an education process with, we'll just call them your customer, even if it's your best friend, right? There kind of has to be an education session where you sit down and you walk through what they're asking for, but you manually execute, and you have this interactive dialogue. Where does this come from? Where does it go? And why? And you have to help kind of remold their image or idea of what it is that they were asking for.
Yeah, that is right. Now,
What I was going to say was and trust me, I think everyone here probably knows who I am, whatever. I'm no quote unquote programmer, right? But I've done a lot of stuff with an API approach. Honestly, actually, people come to a lot of our events wanting to send keystrokes. Because I refuse to take that approach, just because of how inconsistent and unreliable, especially if you're sharing with other people on other computers, it was. I never learned really how to do that. Not much, not more than a hotkey or a hot string to send some simple stuff. But it's one of those things that often people who work in AutoHotkey, let's say they go on Fiverr and they find someone to do something. The person solving the problem isn't even aware. Tank, that's my point. Is so not only is it be careful who you get when you're having someone work in your code. And again, I'm not knocking if it's what you got, and you got to do it yourself. I send keystrokes occasionally, but it's just, it breaks so fast. And to Zayas's point too, of making sure you're in the right window and this and that, or do I have to dedicate a whole other window somewhere where I don't put anything in front of it? I don't do anything with it.
Not only that, it's also human error. I remember we developed a little script for somebody, and as we were not able to use the API as we wanted to, we had to do something very specific. And I told the guy, look, and I made a video. I said, look, when you open the Chrome window, make sure that you only have one tab open. And also make sure that you don't have 3 Chrome windows open. Right? Because if you have multiple tabs with what we were doing, it is not that it was going to fail, but it could fail. And I didn't want to have that particular thing. He said, yeah, perfect. No problem. Then a few days later, he goes ahead and says hey, your script breaks very often. I'm going to send you a video of what I'm doing. And when he shares the video, the first thing he has is like 1, 2, 3 windows open, and all of them had like 20 tabs open. And I'm like, I specifically explained that would happen if you had so many. So removing the human interaction from the automation is the best you can do. But the problem is when you're sending keystrokes or moving the mouse, it's really difficult for you to remove the user interaction from the automation without totally letting the user like not use the computer.
Well, yeah, and in the events, the rare events that I've done it, I've insisted on block input.
Yeah,
which is easy to do as well, right? But
yeah.
I don't like it because once I needed to restart my computer, and now I don't use block input anymore.
You found yourself that you cannot do anything with it. So block input is kind of like a solution, but I usually think I would suggest if you're going to go ahead and simulate sending keystrokes and those kind of things, make sure that you either block just when you're going to send the input, not all the time, just when you're just going to send it, and then unblock it right away so that the user does not feel the heat of not being able to use the computer. But still, that is not a good solution. But there is something that it has to its advantage. It's really quick. Anybody can just go ahead and say send, Control Enter, ABC, and that's it. You know, so that's the
so like there's another tactic to that though too. Like you can put whatever you're sending in to the clipboard and send a Control V.
Yeah, that's a good way of just not having to
and
send.
then that's even quicker.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually responded. I don't know if I've seen Matthew here yet. He made a post on LinkedIn. I thought it was really cool. On LinkedIn, he posted how he has a hot string which dumps in text when people instant message him on LinkedIn, you know, and there's all the salesy crap, right? And he had written this hot string that basically sends, you know, while I appreciate connecting to people, I really hate, you know, salesy messages. And he was sending it using the send command, and it was a long thing. And I basically said, I said, you know, this is awesome, but you know, for stuff with long text, I will copy it to the clipboard and then just send a paste. And of course, out of sleep, you know, of 100 milliseconds, and then restore the clipboard after. Otherwise, you end up sending your first clipboard, which was really a bug, not a bug, but a little bummer that took me a long time to figure out. But yeah, and it's so much faster and you know, more consistent, and it'll work in almost any editor. But yeah, the other big one I'd say is, which is, as you kind of alluded to it, is, hey, you know, one is, do I need this right now? Do I need this in the next 5 minutes? You know, sometimes you have something where, like, you know, I had Maestri at first, and Isaiah's help with it, you know, automate my task for doing stuff based off of an image search and sending text. I almost never use the tool unless I have a very quick thing I just need to get done. And it's kind of a one and done, you know, it's not something I'm going to keep forever. I'm like, you know what? It's great for that, right? I can very quickly, you know, find something, click on it or send text to it and do whatever. It's awesome for that, right? It's great. But if I'm going to do something 100,000, well, first off is how many times am I going to use it? And the next one is what's the repetition of it? You know, then you start talking about, should it be efficient, besides reliable, besides logging errors? You know, when there is an error, I know Geek Dude earlier mentioned something about API calls and being able to programmatically detect that something went wrong and, you know, capture your error and then, you know, log stuff about it.
I would say, basically, we have to divide stuff into quick and reliable. So then you have these two camps. You need something very quick and easy to maintain. Well, then just use the send command.
Fair enough.
I would definitely just use send input, right?
Well, and then there are some, and that's why to me, COM is one of those things. If there's a COM object, that can be both, right? You can't very quickly write some stuff with COM with Excel
And I would put that one on the reliable end. Like you need it to always work. I would go with COM instead of but again, to your point, the COM is not only reliable, it's really fast.
It can be. I'm
Right.
saying in order to write the code. Is that, we talking about writing the code or actually executing the code?
Well, basically kind of like a mixture of both. Like if you need something done fast, like I need a script for today and I need it to work, then I would go ahead and create some send commands. If I need it to be actually reliable, I would use COM. And the reason why I wouldn't say that COM is fast is just because sometimes COM has a learning curve. If you haven't used a COM object before, or if you,
Which is a really good point.
right, if you don't know what options you have available, you might take longer. And when I was referring about the speed, it's about the coding speed.
Which is another really good example of, hey, what if there's already a lot of libraries or things out there built in this language and examples of doing what I want to do? Well, then I might even just use what's available. Like instead of,
That is right. That is right. So, and actually talking about those type of things, like the ACC library is one of those. For AutoHotkey version 1, you have this ACC library that allows you to pick inside programs and see where the controls are located at and actually interact with the controls of a program. If you need something fast and reliable, and there is the ACC library out there.
let's not
then just
forget
use
the
that.
UIA. The Descolada's on the call, man.
Oh, the Scalata is here. Yeah, you know what? The UIA, which is kind of like very similar to the ACC library, kind of like the superset of the ACC library, is another way that you can interact with the program. But again, then there is this learning curve. Send input is easy. You send input, enter, and that's it. Actually sending an enter key to using the UIA library is a little bit different. And there's a few things that you have to keep into account. But my preference, whenever I can, I would use the UIA library instead of using the send input because it's more reliable. That's what happens.
Regarding COM, I actually have a question. If you have a program and you don't know if it has COM options, is there a way to quickly get to see what methods there are for that COM object?
Yes.
That's interesting.
So I don't know off the top of my head who wrote it. I don't remember. But there is a COM inspector GUI as that's loaded with a tool that's out there, Auto GUI or something like that. So I kind of pirated that a while back, and so I may have, and it's by no means perfect yet, but I may have built a kind of a tool, if you will, that may take a, say Internet Explorer application and auto build you a class for it. I'm trying to find a copy of where
I think Joe is sending kind of like a copy of that particular script, right?
Yeah, well, it's the page. I have a COM page, and in it, Tank, a while back, I asked you for the one that you had done. I think, yeah, it's the letter S up there at the bottom of the downloads. But I think that was the one that, at least when we had talked about it, that was the one for peeking into the COM class stuff.
Now that is one of the things, and again, when we are kind of like choosing, when Joe and I we talk to somebody and they need some automation, and we're trying to pick and choose which type of automation to use. One of the things that we talk about, like for example, this COM object, to pick out a COM object, great. But sometimes it happens that I need to go ahead and read the manual for that COM object. Like for example, the MSDN manual of it. And
Well,
it is
that's what I
really
was going to say. Is,
time-consuming. Like, it is really
Yeah.
time-consuming. Somebody's actually
Yeah.
sharing their screen. I think Alan is actually sharing how it looks, how the tool actually looks for picking inside a COM object. Not really sure if that's what it is all about. I mean,
yeah. So Joe, that's not quite what I was talking about. That's part
Okay.
of it.
Okay.
This tool I had made actually generates a whole AutoHotkey class with links to
so
documentation.
it creates the class. Okay.
It creates the class and adds links for every function for where the documentation is.
Okay, that sounds amazing, actually. So I'm sorry. Do you get the information from the MSDN documentation and then convert it into AutoHotkey script?
No, I don't pull it for. I don't pull the class.
Oh, like the code
out
and
of that.
you just add the interfaces for it.
I literally pull the interface for its methods and properties.
That sounds like
But
a very
I'll
interesting
find
thing.
out. I'm gonna find a copy
Awesome,
of it here.
awesome.
Yeah,
That sounds good.
I'll make sure to add it to this page that I mentioned, and maybe take and at some point we'll make a video walking through how to use it. So it does sound pretty.
I'm on the page now, and I see here download COM inspector tool by Alchemist, and I think that is the one that Tank mentioned, and also download Win32 classic COM class from Tank. So I think it's already on their page.
Oh, the Alchemist one. Okay, so R is the one that. Okay, yeah, I remember.
Alchemist without the GUI. I think it's the same guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Eric is saying that you can use something called reflection to detect the interface of a COM object or .NET assembly. So that is a very interesting tool. I will take a look at it later.
Are you going to reflect on it?
Maybe I will reflect on it. Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and take a look at that. Now, most of the times, if we, in general, as we mentioned, we prefer the COM objects or UIA library and stuff or APIs. But if we have to spend a lot of time researching how to do something in that COM object, then that is not the best solution for your tool. Sometimes you need the tool done, and you have to keep in mind that you're going to give the tool to the person, and maybe that person is going to be maintaining the code. It's not you. So they're going to maintain the code. If they have no idea about COM objects or APIs, they will be calling you back and saying, hey, the tool is not working anymore, or I have to fix this. So sometimes not only the speed or reliability is a factor, but also who is going to be keeping that code? Who is going to be maintaining that code? The person has to know the way that you're using. If you're using COM, they should be at least familiarized with COM, because if they want to maintain the code, they should know what they're doing, right? So that is another thing that I usually take into consideration when I'm actually trying to figure out which way I want to use to go ahead and automate a specific task.
Which approach to use? Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Actually, in general, what was is there any approaches that you have used that you said that was the best solution for that particular problem? Is there anything that you have done like, no, I know that I cannot change this one. Like, this is how it goes forever. Is there anything, because I had that one time that I was actually working with a specific program, and we thought that making HTTP requests was the best way, right? We thought that that was the way to go, because usually HTTP requests, an API, awesome. But then we figure out that actually having access to the local database that was in the computer was way better. So I just connected to the local database, and I said, like, nah, I don't have to do HTTP requests anymore.
That was what actually, the stuff that we did the other day for our tool. The automator is on a WordPress website, right? And the tool we're using, Easy Digital Downloads, has an API available where you can ping and get results. And so there's actually a whole different API type that you can do to interact with WordPress. And so you can programmatically do stuff, and depending on the extension you're using, they might have an API or not. But then I realized, wait a minute, all of WordPress is a MySQL database. And from working with Maestriath, we figured out how to connect to a MySQL database with AutoHotkey. And now we just do SQL queries instead of going through the API, and they're lightning fast. And it's crazy how much data you can get, so reliably, and using SQL, so we can easily tweak our query, right, dynamically. It's so amazing. But yeah, it was a really big aha of like, you know what?
That is right. That is right.
I saw Eric mentioned the inspect.exe. Is that the one? I don't think that's what Mage was referring to, or for a COM inspector. The other thing, interesting thing I thought of was, I think what happened when we were having our call with Descolada was the UIA approach. It's, I assume, technically an API, but it kind of bridges the gap between the two. But the one thing I love about the UIA approach is once you learn how to really use that well, unlike, you don't have to, most tools, not all, but most tools these days are going to have that backbone available, right? Where you can do stuff to it. Unlike with COM, you got to hope there's a COM object, or maybe there's older program that has controls that we can interact with, which is, if you have an older program, controls are amazing, right? That you can interact with them and do stuff with them. But yeah, that UIA, it's kind of a blend to me between the two, because you're really only able to replicate what the human can do, right? Even though you're programmatically doing it.
Yes, and UIA is just an interface for accessibility functionality on a program. So basically, in the end, you are imitating a human to some extent, not all, because, for example, there's some things that when you're, and this is something that you have to keep in mind if you're using UIA to automate stuff, some controls, they do not really exist until you click on the GUI to show them. So when the GUI is shown, then the controls exist. In certain situations, it's like that. So, and actually, you mentioned something very interesting last time, that we were doing an example of the automating Spotify's interface. And when you click on a checkbox, when the checkbox switched to the checked state, it was one control. And when it switched to the unchecked state, it was a different control. So there's a few weird things that happen when you're using the UI automation that is not the same. For example, when you're using control click or click on a specific location on the window. So if you do that, clicking on a specific location, the location is always the same, right? But when you're using UIA, the control itself can change to something totally different. So you have to keep track of those little details. And that's what makes the learning curve to some of the options that we have, the automating options, more difficult than others, or not fit to what you're trying to do, because sometimes it is not fit. You might not use UIA in certain situations. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what are situations that I might choose, pick and choose? And I think, Joe, we discussed this a little bit a while ago about, for example, what happens if I have restrictions in my computer in which I cannot download certain libraries, right? So we have Rufadium as a very nice library to control Chrome, for example, and Edge. And
Firefox.
Yeah, and Firefox and most, the browsers. But the thing is that that library downloads an executable file that is the kind of like the the driver for that particular application. What happens if I cannot download that executable because I'm at work or something like that, and they have restrictions on that? So even though that is a very good automation approach for a browser, I might be restricted and I will have to pick another way of automating that. That's the reason why it's good to know the different ways how we can automate. And actually, I think that's what the link is all about, right? So the ways to automate, you have different ways that you can pick and choose about how to automate certain tasks. And the point is, when would you choose one over the other? So
Yeah, and an interesting one came up just yesterday. I think it was during the live call where someone was trying to automate a healthcare database type thing. And
yeah,
roughly after 2 minutes through it, they're like, "Oh, did I mention it's on a Citrix, computer?" So we're like, "Oh, yeah, that kind of changes, everything."
everything. That is right.
However, what I was saying too is you can, we've had it with a client of ours. They were able to actually put AutoHotkey on the remote computer, and we could put our code there. So there is a chance, right? Like you can do stuff. The second you hear Citrix, my point is, don't think, okay, now I have to do image search or sending mouse clicks or maybe tabs or whatever, right? There are possible alternatives. Maybe you can do HTTP requests even, right? Or whatever, right? Or a SQL database. There might be a different way to connect to that same database that's behind the Citrix thing that you're using. Not always, but it's possible.
That is right. I'm sorry to interject here. I see this question about building a GUI from XML, and what happens is in other languages like C# and other more newer languages allow you to create a GUI interface from an XML structure. And probably the question is there any ways to generate GUIs from that? Right now, so as this is not related to the main topic of automation, I might give you the answer a little bit later, but just to tell you, a lot of things like this, building tools to create a GUI, you can automate that. So you can actually create a script that reads your AutoHotkey code and just creates it into an XML that could be used somewhere else. And again, here we go with the approaches of automating that. I could definitely just go read the file line by line, but I could use other ways of doing that, like, for example, the XPath library to actually generate an XML. So again, for different type of tools or different type of automation that you're trying to do, just reading a file and actually converting it into a different language, you might use different approaches, like just simply creating a template and just putting the stuff in it, or using a COM object or a library that generates XML from already existing, code. In your case, I would say, like, right now in AutoHotkey, there is no tool that does exactly what you're asking for, but it's not that it's difficult to do it. It's just reading the GUI command and just expressing that as an XML rather than just a line of code. That's all.
And I can tell you, and I know Maestro is still on here, but we've made crazy complex GUIs based on data that's in XML. But
right, that's how AutoHotkey AHK Studio actually works. Everything is based on XML, which sadly now, knowing what I know, I would have probably used something different, but XML was what I knew at the time. The entire GUI, resizable, the whole 9 yards, is done through XML. It's built using XML, all of the sizes, what types of controls, everything is dictated and driven by the XML file, but it's all backed by standard AutoHotkey GUI commands that create the controls, the edit controls, or the check boxes, or whatever buttons, and all of that stuff gets built from the XML. But there's no easy way to do it, like just, here's my XML, make it work. Just
no, exactly. And I think you have played with C# as well, so probably you are familiar with the
C# uses something called XAML, XAML,
right,
or XAML. But that's basically, honestly, I started writing UIs without the XAML and just creating it from, like you would normally do in AutoHotkey with your GUI, add, whatever. And they basically have that same facility. It's just not as it's not as easily structured. But once you get into it and you learn that, oh, hey, I can completely from whole cloth make a dynamic GUI that just is not possible using XAML because everything is hard coded. You don't
Yeah.
want to have that if your data structure or the particular use of your application may change depending on what the particular what the user is doing at that particular time, and you don't want to create 17 trillion different pages of code for all of this other thing. You just want to be like, okay, let's make this reactive. Let's say, all right, they're doing this. Well, with 30 lines of code, I can completely rearrange this entire user interface to get the data that I need so that I can then go back to where I was without having to spin up an entire new window, this, that, and all the other. Just do it in code and be done with it. And it's so much easier.
That is right. Now, and this is the other thing. If you use the correct data structure, which we will talk about a little bit later, we have a section for that. If you have the correct data structure, you can make automating your own script a little bit easier, not only for yourself, but for other people, because then we can just access the data structure that you have set up, and we can actually use that to automate whatever we need. And probably we'll see a little bit more of that later on when we talk about data structures again. Now, I see that Charlie Tank, you're actually sharing your screen.
Yeah, so first of all, I mentioned that it generates a script with documentation. And so I wanted to show an example of what that looks like. So, but the point was, if I'm going to generate, when I was putting this together originally, and this is not done, guys. Nowhere near to the level I want to go to, but if I'm going to generate a class for someone who doesn't know how to do it themselves, I need to provide them some information about what that actually means. So, the fact that we're pulling a lot of this stuff directly from the registry and stuff is really important, and some fundamentals about COM. I put links right there for them so they know what they're looking at and why.
Awesome.
But this was an Internet Explorer application, so it generated this this iWeb Browser 2 class because that's the interface
Right.
name, right? So I've got an address bar. I've got I just pre-built links to the Google searches that are probably most likely to give you the results that you really want, so they don't have to figure out what to search for or anything. But the
Yeah.
so like this is some of the garbage that I have to take out, right? There's still some garbage being written to this, but
No, but this looks really good. So basically what it does is that it reads the information directly and then just returns this code, which I would use kind of like a template to start with, and then later on just modify it according to what I need. But this is a very good start.
Well, that's the point, is for it to be a starting point. But
Yeah.
the other thing that I was going to point out here is, like, I went ahead and like a next step is to get the actual parameter names. But like, it knows which ones are optional and which ones aren't already.
Right.
We're already context aware of that. So these and these descriptions come straight out of what's already part of the COM interface for these.
That looks amazing. That looks great, actually.
So I'm and it takes a second or two to generate a class, right?
This looks awesome. This is a very good tool that when I'm trying to automate a few more things, like, I would take a look at that later on.
Yeah. So Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, so whenever you in particular are trying to automate the task for a client or for yourself, how do you choose which tool or which way of automating? How do you choose which way of automating you're going to be using? How do you?
You mean like,
Yeah.
do I,
Do you use COM, like when you're making the decision of using COM or actually using another way of automating something? How do you actually go about it? What is the first thing that you check?
all right, well, I mean, first it comes down to, after I've backed up and walked through the process in detail with them, and we've refined what that process is first. And assuming I have picked AutoHotkey as the best tool for the job, then my next approach is to walk down this path of which applications have COM interfaces. And
So you always favor COM on top of everything.
always.
Okay. So and somebody was asking, what is COM automation? So
Right,
what would you say that
right.
what that is?
Yeah, we actually have.
So that's what this is for.
Oh, the COM fundamentals there.
Yeah, I'd still say though, for people who aren't programmers, right?
Mhm.
Think of it like how, you know, how VBA, you can programmatically interact with Excel. That's what you're doing. It's a way to allow you to use AutoHotkey to programmatically control a given program. It's from Microsoft. It's a component object model. It's built into a ton of their programs. And it's just, if it has it, you can programmatically control that program, right?
And so
That last thing that he said, I'm sorry, Anthony, exactly what you just said. It is like an API, but for a desktop computer. It's the original APIs, by the way.
Well, I was going to say, not a website.
No, not a website API, but just the original one.
So I'm going to phrase that a little differently because so the component object model, okay, it's a model. It is language agnostic, number one. Okay. Once I have the only thing that's different from language to language is how I instantiate the interface.
Yep.
Whether I'm going to use create object in VB or com object create, whatever. The only difference is how I instantiate the object. After that, the com object model applies to how I apply references to child objects and properties, etc. The next thing is that COM is nothing more than a standard for exposing programmer intended interactivity from a programmatic level with their application. What it does is basically establish a kind of server for a running application or a DLL that allows you to send requests to it and have it respond. And it is a checkbox in Visual Studio to enable.
Right. Yeah, I would rephrase that. If you're not a programmer and might find those words a little bit confusing, just think of it as a translator. That's how I would definitely put it. So
that is a much better answer.
Yeah. It is just like you have a program reading in C++. The COM object model, which is what you were referring to, would act as a translator between your language, which is in this case AutoHotkey. It would translate the AutoHotkey code into the functions that were defined in C++. And the other way around, and it doesn't matter which language you're using, the COM object model is basically kind of like a language that all of us can speak. That's what it is. And it's exactly what you said, Charlie, that it is language agnostic. It doesn't matter which
Yes.
language you're using. So
Yeah.
so far as your language can create a COM object, it would automatically allow you to use that object. It doesn't matter in which language it was created.
Well,
So,
Yep.
yeah,
So there's a difference in creating a COM object in, say, Python, right? And
yeah.
yet
it is
after
different.
that, I still, walk down the tree,
Yeah.
worksheets, worksheets, cells.
well,
It's just a creation.
when you use a DLL call, you are programming in that other language, right? That's why they're so, for most of us humans that aren't programmers, so difficult, because you're like, what is this crazy crap I got to provide to it, right? Oh, I need to learn C# and figure out what it goes in there. If you're using COM, you don't
You
have
don't
to
care about it. Yeah.
That's
It becomes standardized.
Right.
Yeah, so COM gave us a standardized approach to developing a way to interact with applications.
Now, before that, and actually this is another way that we used to automate programs. Before the COM object model, we had sending messages to Windows. So if you are an AutoHotkey programmer, you will see the send message and post message commands. And all the windows actually listen to these messages all the time. And one way, and very reliable way, by the way, of automating a program is sending in the messages that it could understand. The only problem with that approach is that you would have to figure out which messages that program understands. And that is not an easy feat, especially if they do not have documentation that specifies which messages they listen to. Now, that way of automating has fallen from favor. So right now we are more used to and prefer using COM objects because it is a little bit more intuitive, and you don't have to send a numeric message like 234. I don't know what that means. In COM objects, you use functions or methods that are named in a very intuitive way, so it is easy to follow. But again, if you do not have a COM object available and you cannot use UIA and you don't want to send keystrokes, hey, let's try to send a direct message to that particular control or to that program, and you might get the result that you're looking for. So again, there are always different ways to automate stuff. Some of them might need a little bit more work to understand. Sending messages, definitely, it's going to take a lot more work to understand that COM objects, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, Isaiah, I have said a version of what you just said many times, but I think it's really important to understand that everything in a GUI-based operating system, Linux included, can be reduced to its most simple interactions with post and send message commands. Everything.
Yeah, which is a really important thing, Tank, to remember and it gets back to, if you're doing something where it's going to be used a lot over and over and you need to be reliable, but there doesn't seem to be a COM object or some other programmatic way to do it, often through some work, you can figure out a way to programmatically interact with it, right? And
there used to be a tool, I don't know if it's still out there, I haven't looked in a long time, but there used to be a tool called, and it was produced by Microsoft, called WinSpector Spy.
Yeah, I still have
and it would actually and it would track and log all of the post and send messages.
Yes, yeah, I remember that too. And that's what I used to kind of like figure out some programs a while back. Now it is not easy because there are thousands of messages.
There is a severe learning curve.
Yeah,
it's one of the funniest videos. If you go search for it on Isaiah's channel from like 11 or 12 years ago, it's why I knew who he was in the first one. AHK Toots, right, is his channel.
Right, yeah. You had
it was even back when YouTube wouldn't allow you like videos longer than 15 minutes or whatever, because you had sections. And in the video, you're like, hey, look at this. And then the craziness of all this updates were happening. And you're like, yeah, you got to filter these. But
yeah, you get thousands and thousands of messages a second. So they are just running around. So it is again, what I mentioned, is not really a simple way to do stuff, but it is effective. Actually, yesterday we were talking to Thomas, I don't know if he's around, about, he is trying to figure out when you have text selected under the mouse or whatever. And one of the methods that he uses is that he detects whether the control right now is an edit control. And what he does is that then he sends the copy message to it instead of sending Control C. Somebody was saying, I think Geek Dude was saying recently that he had an issue with an application seeing Control C as a non-standard way. So if you can send the WM copy message to that window, you probably can get exactly the same result without sending the Control C command to it. So again, it's just a matter of what message you're really sending when you do Control C. That's
Yeah, or like detecting universally drag and drop or things like that.
Yes.
There was
Message from Eleni.
there was something else that I find an incredibly useful and
Message from Eleni.
always
Message from Eleni.
seemingly
Message
overlooked
from Eleni.
tool
Message from Eleni.
for
You're not getting a message, are you, Jake?
Message from Eleni.
yeah, somebody writes automations on their phone to make sure they don't miss certain
Message from
messages
Eleni.
from people, and
Message from Eleni. Message from Eleni.
yeah, I automate my phone too.
Okay, that's a good one.
Message from
I automate everything if I can. Why not? But so there's a tool that people either don't know exists or
are not aware of it,
or not aware of it.
Yeah.
And my brain is going blank. Steps recorder. That's the one I'm looking for.
Oh, the steps recorder. Yeah, that's the steps recorder from Windows,
So,
right?
yeah, it's part of Windows. Every version of Windows since XP.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and people do not realize how powerful this is. So I can make this capture up to, some number of steps, right? I can say capture the screen or not, depending on the privacy necessary.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
prefer to capture the screen. I can choose an output file location,
Okay. Now, you know what? Next time, what you just mentioned might be a way of automating certain programs, because I could do the steps recorder and try to read the steps recorder's file and convert them into AHKCon actions and probably automate a program that way. I will take a look into that at some point and add it to our ways, one of our 17 ways of automating a program.
So this is really a quick way to gather information from a client, right? Or what's going right or wrong, because so check this out. I told it to record, right? And I'm gonna click a couple of random things. Okay, doesn't matter. All right, and then I'm gonna hop back over here. I could add comments with each step. I can. Oh no, I didn't hit record. Sorry. But so I can do the back button.
Yeah.
Right? Stop record. Right. So the
Yeah.
Why did it not prompt me just now?
I think he's not sharing the screen, right? But now here's the thing. Now, when we're automating stuff, we would at some point see if we could use the steps recorder, but I think we're going to show that in a different situation. Let's see if we can answer this last question, because we're 5 minutes into the next topic. That, like, do you as AHK experts successfully use APIs that require authorization, OAuth, and access token, and so on with AutoHotkey? I find it very difficult. The developer documentation is usually not easy, blah, blah, blah. They are usually based on other languages, and we he was watching the webinar and stuff, and he was trying to connect to other APIs. Now I'm going to answer that question really quickly because we have a few minutes. Yes, we have been able to successfully use tokens and connections. The easiest way I have noticed, and it is good that it's getting traction online, is using the JWT tokens. That's for example, the Zoom API uses this, in which they give you a JWT, and every time you make an HTTP request, you pass that token in your request. But the OAuth, which is the one that you were referring to, just have to think of it as steps. You have to make one request to get a token, and once you get that token, you make another request to get authorized, and after you do that, then your authorization is working. If you think about the authorization process as 2 steps instead of 1, it might be a little bit easier sometimes to get the idea, but people are moving away from that type of authentication. They're going to be using the JWT, which is extremely simple to understand. Just take a look at the Zoom app, the Zoom API to see how it works. And later on, we could give you an example of that as well.
Yeah, let's take a little step back just to clarify. So there's web service APIs and there's APIs, right? And actually, I love how Tank earlier talked about, if you think about POM as more like a server that you can connect to and interact questions with it, then it actually, APIs in general all are similar.
Makes
right?
sense, yeah.
But the web service APIs, which is what he's asking about, is you're connecting to a service online and you're doing queries to a server somewhere, right? Maestruth and I, like we did years ago, we did the Amazon product lookup, and we spent, Maestruth, I don't know if you're still there, we spent a good 5-6 hours working through the stupid OAuth 2. Now, there's also a big difference between the OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, right? OAuth 1, 5 minutes, you're done, right? Like it's so easy. OAuth 1 is really, hey, I'm a developer, I have a tool, I'm going to run it from this computer. I'm not giving it to people to have on their phone to use with their accounts, right? It's much simpler. The OAuth 2, crazy more complex, 100% agree. And to Zeus's point, everyone does them differently, and so you solve one and then you go to the next one and it's all
totally different. Yeah.
So
I think
the other important thing to remember is every browser call, when you're using your browser and you hit a server, that's an API call, right? So often, and this is what was great about IE, you could use the XML HTTP request, log in with IE, and then connect to that version and do API calls, your XML HTTP calls from there, using your credentials from the browser, which was so easy. And then we looked at doing this with some other tools, like even auto control and Chrome.AHK and Raphidium. And it was auto control, there was no problem, right? Or no, we still had a problem. It was detecting.
It's difficult. Yep. Actually, it's really difficult. Now the point is, what I would say, something very good. We are moving away from Auth 2 to the new JWT. So if you have time, just read about it. And if you're actually connecting to services that are on the web, it's very likely that they are already having an option for that, or they will soon be switching, because it is so simple and so secure that people are going to be saying, like, we don't have to deal with O2 anymore. Like, I don't want to deal with that anymore, right?
So let's cut. We're on our time break, so let's stop. And now I know why Isaiah was bringing it up, because he's presenting. So let's stop here.